Okay, be here tonight. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. Everybody be here tonight. Yeah. We're going to give our report on the Guatemala mission trip. We got back last Saturday and Sunday, for the most part. But we just want to share with you what we experienced there, what all went on, what all we were able to do and not do. But I really want to encourage you to be back here this evening. One of the things we're able to do when we go into Guatemala is the beginning day, our first day, they kind of give us a day to go side. This is where we went downtown, kind of do some sightseeing. And then the end of the week, or the end of our trip, we also get one more day where we kind of get to just kind of unwind. And we're able to go to markets in the central part of the capital city, right about where we were right there. There's a market called the Underground Market, and it's not really underground like it's sketchy or anything. It's just underground. But so we go in there and we shop, and you're kind of the process is you go and haggle. You know, you kind of say, you've got this marked at 100 quetzales, I'll give you 70 or whatever. Well, then we did the same thing at the end of the week in Antigua. And one thing I learned, which I thought was pretty interesting, you have to pay for everything. I mean, I started looking around and I found something I wanted, and I could tell them, say, hey, I want that, but I don't have any quetzales. And they just go, okay, forget it. And I said, well, wait a minute. I'm from Idaho. Still, they make you pay for everything. That's not news to anybody, is it? We know that anything with value costs something. We know that everything has a price. Even if I get something for free, it costs someone something to create that, to manufacture that, to get it into my hands. Everything has a price. While we were in Guatemala, the first Saturday, the Saturday and Sunday we were there, we did a seminar, and our theme for the seminar was forming disciples. The congregation there is healthy and is trying to grow, but they saw this as a focus, that they need to be forming disciples. Now listen, this isn't about going and converting people. That's an aspect of it. But this is about strengthening Christians. That yes, there's an aspect of reaching out to the lost and making new disciples. But their focus was the idea of making us as followers of Jesus stronger. Making us better at being followers. So this morning, what I want us to do is take a look at the costs associated with being a disciple of Jesus. This is something we need to understand. What I want us to do is we're going to look at two different aspects of what it means to be a disciple. We're going to look at the cost for discipleship. What that cost. We understand the cost for discipleship on one level. We understand that was the price that Jesus paid. The price that Jesus paid with His blood, the price that Jesus paid with His life. But we also need to understand there's a cost of discipleship. That's where we come in. What does it cost us to be disciples? We need to understand this. You know, we need to understand what it means to be a disciple. We need to understand that what it means to be a disciple is it means to be a follower. It means to be a learner. Isn't that what we want to be as Christians? We want to be those who learn from and follow Jesus. That's our objective. And we want to get better at that. We want to do that better and better each and every day. In order to do that, what we'll see this morning is what Jesus teaches is you have to commit. There's no halfway with this. To be a disciple, to be a follower of Jesus is going to require everything of you. And we need to be real about that as we look at what it means to be a follower. So what I want us to do this morning, we're going to look at this blessing that we have, this opportunity that we have to be followers of Jesus. That Jesus even opened that door up and said, I want you to come learn from me. I want you to come fellowship with me. I want you to be in this association with me. We need to look at what that cost Jesus. We need to look then at what we're called to do, what we're called to be. And then we're going to look at those who've done it before us, those who have modeled that before us so we know it can be done. And then we'll wrap up with some practical application, things that we can use in our own daily lives to become better followers of Jesus. So let's look first at this idea of the cost for our discipleship. Plain and simple. In fact, we sang a couple of songs. Those are the songs that Richard chose, I believe, for his sermon, but they work perfect for this too, because you think of how deep the Father's love. How deep the love that Jesus had, that He was willing to give what He gave. Behold the man upon the cross. Jesus willing to give His life so that we can have this relationship with God through Jesus Christ. His death on the cross paid a price that we could never pay ourselves. We sing that, we understand that, I think, intuitively, but we have to also understand the real depth of that. We could never pay the price that had to be paid for our sin. We would never be good enough. Jesus had to be the perfect sacrifice to pay that ransom, to allow us to be disciples, to allow us to be followers of Jesus. His life and His death are just the perfect example of what true love, what true sacrifice really is. Jesus Himself says in John 15:13, says, no greater love has any man than to do what? Than to lay down his life. But listen, Jesus says to lay down His life for His friends. He's in a room with His friends right there. He's saying, no greater love than this, to lay down your life for your friends. But listen, we have to understand what Romans 5:8 says. That God demonstrates His love for us in that while we were still not friends, when we were distant from Jesus, while we were still sinners, what did Christ do? He died for us. He paid that price because we can't do it. I want you to look over to Hebrews chapter 12, if you would, please. You ever really think about what Jesus did? I mean, I don't mean the cross. We talk about the cross a lot. We talk about the crucifixion. We talk about the resurrection. Jared had a great talk at the Lord's Supper table about how powerful that had to have been for those who really saw Jesus resurrect. But do you ever think about what came before that? Have you ever been sitting at home? Maybe you just finished up dinner, you just finished up cleaning up the house, took a shower, ready to sit down and watch your favorite show or watch a ball game or something, the phone rings. And somebody said, maybe it's one of your kids. Dad, I ran out of gas. Could you come get me? Or maybe it's a friend saying, hey, my wife was just in an accident and we're in the hospital. We'd really love just some company. You ever been in that situation? Where you're like, and listen, I'm going to fess up here. You can deny this all you want. But there's a part of you that goes, oh, okay. Think about Jesus. Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 and 2 says this. Therefore, since we have such a large cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let us lay aside every hindrance and sin that so easily ensnares us. Let us run with endurance the race that lies before us, keeping our eyes on Jesus, the source and perfecter of our faith. For the joy that lay before Him, He endured the cross. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, for the joy set before. What does that mean? I'm just going to tell you my opinion on this. You can disagree if you want to. We often hear this described as the joy that was set before Jesus was doing the will of the Father. I don't doubt that at all. I think Jesus took great comfort, was very cognizant of the fact that He was obeying His Father. He says it over and over. But I want you to think about this. The word for right there is the Greek word anti, A-N-T-I is what it would be in English. When you're anti something, you're opposed to that. If I'm anti, if I'm anti blue pews, I'm opposed to blue pews. If I'm anti Pittsburgh Steelers, it means I don't like the Pittsburgh Steelers. Here's a definition. This is from Thayer, Bible Lexicon. Another definition says over against. opposite to before. For instead of, in place of something. A instead of, B for. Those are the ways the word can be translated. I want you to think of it this way. Let us run with endurance. Let us lay aside every hindrance and the sin that so easily ensnares us. Let us run with endurance the race that lies before us, keeping our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith, for the joy that lay before Him. The footnote there says, who instead of the joy that lay before Him. I'm just going to tell you, it's my opinion that we have mistranslated that word in many of our translations. I think Jesus could have stayed home. He got the call. Come out, we need help, we need saving. Jesus was comfortable at home. But instead of the joy that lay before Him by staying in heaven, He came here and lived here. Instead of asking God to figure out some other way to do it, He came here. He lived and He died for us. Now listen, I know in the garden Jesus prays 3 times, if there's that other way, let's do that. But ultimately it was not my will, but your will be done. Jesus paid the ultimate price so we could follow. Paid the ultimate price so we could be disciples, so we could be learners. He opened the door to a relationship with God the Father through His sacrifice. He pays the ultimate price. Peter describes it this way in 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 18 and 19. He says these words, for you know that you were redeemed from your empty way of life inherited from your fathers, not with perishable things like silver or gold. Now listen, he's minimizing silver and gold right there. These are people who are being persecuted. He says, it wasn't like stuff like that. That's stuff that fades away, disappears, rots, whatever. That isn't what saved you. That's going to make an impact on his readers. But he says, here's what saved you. But with the precious blood of Christ, like that of an unblemished or spotless lamb. It was His precious blood that paid the price for us to follow. It was Him making the decision to do the will of the Father and to leave heaven and come live life on this earth. To be mistrusted, to be ignored, ultimately to be arrested, brutally beaten, hung on a cross, bleed and die, so we can follow, so we can be disciples. When we look at this gift, we have to understand this incredible gift God gave us, this incredible gift that Jesus gave us with His own life. It demands a response from us. It demands some thinking about it. It demands us to look at that and go, okay, what does that mean for me? It demands a response that involves accepting or understanding first and accepting the cost for or the cost of discipleship. So that's what we need to talk about next. This is where it comes down to us. Jesus paid the price. Now, what do we do about it? When we think about what discipleship is going to cost us, Jesus makes it very clear that this is no laughing matter. This is no easy thing that we're called to do. Turn your Bibles to Mark chapter 8, if you would, please. In Mark chapter 8, Jesus, in speaking to His own followers, He sets forth a very clear, a very demanding standard that we just have to reckon with. We just need to look at it and say, okay, what does this mean in my life? Mark chapter 8, verse 34, calling the crowd along with His disciples, His followers, He said to them, if anyone wants to follow after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. This verse proves that Jesus loves preachers, because that is a 3-point sermon right there in one verse. But look at what Jesus said. He says, here's what it means. Here's what it means to be a disciple. He said, if you want to be a follower, if you really want to come learn from me, here's what you got to do. Number one, he says, you got to deny yourself. What does it mean for us to deny ourselves? Sometimes we think of the words, a word like deny, even in this context, deny yourself. That's very Bible-y sounding. What does it mean for me to deny myself? It means telling myself no once in a while. It means realizing that I don't make the rules anymore. That as a follower, as a disciple of Jesus, He is now Lord of everything. So I deny myself. When self says, I'd really like to partake of this thing, then I know God says I shouldn't, I don't. When self says, I'd really like to have this outburst, this emotion that God says I shouldn't have, I say I don't. Because I'm denying myself because of that's part of the cost of being a disciple. It requires a willingness to put Christ right in the middle of our lives and make Him the focus of everything that we do. And realize that He makes our decisions now. So we deny ourselves. Then He says, number two, He says, take up your cross. Now we can't leave out Luke's version of this, where Luke includes the word daily, because that's what it is, right? It is a daily process. We don't take up our cross once. You do it every day. Take up your cross. This is an expression that culture has kind of hijacked. They said, well, it's just the cross you bear. And they're talking about, the whatever it is, some sort of problem you have, some sort of issue you have. Maybe the cross you bear is the person you don't like across the aisle from you at work or what. That isn't what it's about. When we take up our cross every day, listen, Jesus' listeners, when Jesus says this, there is no doubt what they would think. They would think death. You don't bring up the idea of taking up your cross without those listeners in that day immediately thinking punishment for death. But that's what it is, isn't it? It's putting to death the things that God says aren't okay. It's putting to death self. It's putting to death those attitudes, those emotions, those feelings, those desires that are contrary to the will of God. So when Jesus says, take up your cross daily, death is what He's talking about. We deny ourselves, and then we die to self. Really, when Jesus uses this expression, we have to understand, we have to acknowledge the fact that Jesus isn't asking us to do anything that He didn't do. Because as we've already discussed, He did it. He literally did it. And this is what Paul's writing about in Galatians 2:20, right? Where he says, I've been crucified with Christ. I've died to self. I've been crucified with Christ, but I'm still alive. But it's not self making the decisions anymore. This is a paraphrase. It's not self making the decisions anymore. It's Christ who lives in me. Denying self and every day taking up our cross. Knowing that self is dead. That it's now Jesus who lives through us. That guides everything about our lives. And really this last phrase, in my opinion, this is really where it hits hard. Because now Jesus says, follow me. He says, now it's time to start moving your feet. Now it's time to start in motion. You can mentally, you can tell somebody, I'm denying myself and I'm daily dying for Jesus. Are you moving? Are you following? Are you actively pursuing the life Jesus wants you to live? I don't know if you know who this guy is. We, here a while back, started watching this show. This guy's name is Ben Napier. Started watching this show called Hometown. That this guy and his wife live in someplace, Mississippi. I wrote it down. Laurel, Mississippi. And I mean, it was a little town in Mississippi. And then these people started remodeling houses and businesses. And it's some amazing things, like houses they take and completely gut and rebuild completely, and you get them for like $135 or something. It's just unreal. It's not that cheap, but it seems like it sometimes. But this guy does amazing stuff with wood. I mean, he's got all these, I mean, you see the shop there. So I decided recently, I was like, okay, I'm going to do that stuff. I'm taking Jeremy's role. I'm taking over the wood guy. I'm going to start making desks. I'm going to start making chairs. I mean, bed frame, you name it. I'm going to start. So I went and bought all these tools. And look how neat they are. I stacked them all in my garage. I bought some really good lumber, slapped it all in there. I mean, it just looks great, doesn't it? And I started watching TV. I'm just like for a day or two. And then I watched some YouTube videos on wood stuff and read a couple of articles or whatever. And went out in the garage, you know what? Nothing. I wood just sitting there. The tools hadn't done anything. The wood hadn't, I mean, no desks, no chairs, no nothing. Now, I made all that up, but my point is this, that without action, nothing's going to happen. You can prepare, that's great, prepare. You can plan, that's great, plan, but until you do something, nothing is going to happen. Jesus says, deny yourself. Okay, I'll do that. I'll put myself aside. Take up your cross every day. Okay, I'm going to die to my own desires. Then Jesus says, follow me. That means you got to do something. It means you got to act. Being a disciple of Jesus requires our action. Just like that wood, this imaginary wood sitting by my imaginary tools. They can be there all they want. But until I take action, nothing's going to happen. What's going to happen is I'm going to ruin it all. But what's going to happen, but until I do something, nothing happens. Jesus says, deny yourself, take up your cross, but follow. Come after me. Come walk with me. Come live the way I lived. And nothing can happen until we take action, until we make it our lives. And we think, how in the world can we do that? If that's the bar, if that's the standard, how can we do that? I want you to know there are those who have. Jesus' earliest followers, we see in Mark chapter 1 when Jesus calls his first followers, his first real disciples, those who become what we know as the apostles. Peter, Andrew, James, and John. He calls them in Mark chapter 1, verses 16 through 20. Tells us that Jesus said, come, follow me, and I'll make you fishers of men. And what I want us to notice is their reaction. Immediately, they left their nets and they followed. They acted. They didn't just go, you know what, I bet he is the Messiah. Now, let's go fish. They became involved with what Jesus was doing. They became participants in Jesus' ministry. If we look over to Mark chapter 10, in fact, Peter wants to describe to Jesus, as if Jesus doesn't know, but he wants to describe to Jesus exactly this sacrifice that they made. Mark chapter 10, verse 28, Peter began to tell him, says, look, we have left everything to follow you. Peter and Andrew left the fishing business. James and John left their dad. I mean, it even says in the text that they're fishing with their father and they follow Jesus. See you, Dad. Put up the net. I mean, they leave it all. Think of Matthew. Matthew leaves the tax collector's booth where he's making a pretty decent living, we would imagine. It's a shady job, but I mean, he's making a good living. Peter says, we have left everything to follow you. Is he wrong? No. But look what Jesus says. Look at Jesus' response to this. Verse 29, truly I tell you, Jesus said, there's no one who has left house or brothers or sisters or mother or father or children or fields for my sake and for the sake of the gospel who will not receive 100 times more. Now at this time, houses, brothers and sisters, mothers and children and fields with persecution. And here's the point, and eternal life in the age to come. Jesus says, anybody who's willing to leave and to follow, it's worth it. Because there's a reward. There's a reward that waits for us. Now, when we look at what these men did, this was not half-hearted. These guys didn't say, yeah, I'm going to be a Jesus follower. In fact, I'll catch him at the synagogue next week if he's around. They left everything. It was a radical change. They changed everything about their lives. Did they still doubt? Yes. Were they perfect? No. But they were followers. And Jesus doesn't pull punches with them. He doesn't say, well, if you decide to follow me, everything's going to be peaches and cream. Everything's going to be rosy and it's going to be... He says, sometimes you'll leave mothers and fathers and homes and fields. And he says, there will also be persecutions. Thanks for that addition, Jesus. But he's not going to say it's easy. He's not playing with them, but he says, listen, it is absolutely worth it to make the complete spiritual transformation these guys made. You think about these guys. Peter, Andrew, James, and John at least. These guys are fishermen. Who decides when they go to work? They do. Who decides when they quit for the day? They do. They're giving up control of their lives. They're putting Jesus in charge. They're giving up self-sufficiency to go live with Jesus and not know where they're going to lay their heads or where they're going to have a meal. Guys who are, you have to think, these are alpha males. These are men's men. These are guys who are out doing hard work. And they give it up to go follow Jesus. They exchanged, they literally exchanged one life for another because it was that important to be a follower of Jesus to them. So what does that tell us? We can do it. We have examples of men and women throughout the New Testament who did it, who gave up jobs, who gave up family if they had to, who gave up relationships to follow Jesus because it's worth it. So in the next couple of minutes as we close out, I want us to talk about what does this look like for us? What do we do with this today? We see what Peter, Andrew, James, and John, and Matthew, and all these other, we see what they did. We see what Jesus says about it. But what is total commitment? What does that look like for me and you? For each of us, it's going to look a little bit different. My deny self, take up cross, and follow Jesus might look a little bit differently than yours. But each of us have to do something. It's going to require some action from each of us. We may have to give up certain comforts. We may have to endure some ridicule, some persecutions. We may have to make some tough choices that really will determine if we're really in this to be followers. So let's look at what we're called to and we'll close. We're called to prioritize God's kingdom. Now, I'm going to list 17 or 18. No, I'm not. I'm going to list about 5. But there's others too. Don't get me wrong. These are not the only things that are required to be followers. Not the only expectations, but I think these stand out. Jesus says in Matthew 6:33, as plain as it can be, seek first the kingdom of God. That's what followers do. God's kingdom is number one. God's kingdom is the most important thing in our lives. even if it's countercultural. And I'm telling you, it will be countercultural. But that's okay, because it's worth it to prioritize seeking God's kingdom first. We need to serve. Jesus, in John chapter 13, He's washing His followers, He's washing His disciples' stinky, dirty feet before they share this meal. And He tells them in verse 15, this is how you ought to treat each other. Jesus is the ultimate example of service. Being a disciple, and hear me when I say this, being a disciple of Jesus cannot be done in isolation. Maybe sometimes maybe you're stuck somewhere and you can't get to a church building, you can't get to where you're around other Christians. I'm not talking about instances. I'm talking about life. We've got to be engaged with each other. We've got to serve those who are disciples of Jesus. Seek out those that they can serve. We serve other followers. We serve each other, but we also seek those in our communities that we can serve. Because that's what it means to follow Jesus. To live like Jesus lived. We have to share our faith. We have to be people who are willing to speak up. Acts chapter 4, verse 20, Peter and John standing before the Sanhedrin saying, listen, if you guys keep talking about this Jesus character, we're going to beat you, we're going to put you in jail again, we're going to do all this stuff to you. And their response is so great. Whatever. It's up to you, man. Whether you think we should listen to God or to you, that's your call. But I'll tell you what, we can't help but speak about the things that we have seen and heard. Can we? Can we help it? Man, I hope not. I hope when you get in a conversation with somebody at work or at school or wherever about what you did on Sunday, that you cannot wait to say, man, you know what I got to do? I got to be with a bunch of other believers, and we spent time talking about Jesus and worshiping God, and it was awesome. And they might go, you know what, I don't want to hear about this. Say, well, it's too late. You asked. Because I can't help but speak about the things that I have seen and heard. We can't be silent, people. We have been silent a long time. There used to be the expression called the silent majority. That's foolish. Jesus tells us, go talk about me. Jesus tells us, go let your light shine, so that when people see you do your good deeds, they want to know who God is. We have to be people who are willing to share our faith and speak up about who Jesus is. Not about who we are necessarily. Yeah, we as the church, we want people to know about that. But we want them to know what Jesus can do for them when they decide to be a follower. Requires complete devotion. Luke chapter 14, verse 33. Jesus says this. These are strong words. In the same way, therefore, every one of you who does not renounce all of his possessions cannot be my disciple. Well, then we're all in trouble, right? Because I drove here in my car. I'm wearing my clothes. I left my house this morning. I haven't renounced all my possessions. Is that what Jesus means? He means, back to number one, nothing can be ahead of God. Nothing. Nothing can take the place of Jesus in our life. That's complete devotion. That's giving up everything to be a follower. And it's hard. It's challenging. Our world doesn't like it. Our world thinks it's crazy, in fact. But again, Jesus says it's so worth it. Jesus promised. You think of what Jesus says in Mark chapter 10, 29 and 30 in response to Peter's question, or Peter's comment about we gave up everything. Jesus leaves them with a promise. And maybe this is the linchpin in all of this. We've got to be people who are willing to trust. When God says, blessed are those who are persecuted, we got to believe that. When Jesus says that you'll be blessed if you follow, if you put Him first, we got to believe that. We got to trust that Jesus is going to do what He says He will do. That all of His promises mean exactly what they say. Because the ultimate promise Jesus makes there in that particular statement is the promise of an eternal life with Him. It's hard. Yes, it is. It's a tough life. But is it worth it? Absolutely. If you know who this guy is, well, it says his name right there, so if you can read, you know his name. This is Mr. Tom Brady, who was or is, in many regards, the greatest quarterback in NFL history. Winningest, most Super Bowls, played until he was, 57 years old or whatever. No, he wasn't that old. But he played for the Patriots for years and years and years. Great story. If you like him, it's a great story. If you're like me, it's a tolerable story. Then he leaves the Patriots and goes to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and wins the Super Bowl with these people. I mean, he's just legendary. Well, 1st of June, he was inducted into the New England Patriots Hall of Fame. Retired his jersey. Nobody will ever wear 12 again as a New England Patriot. It's pretty impressive. But in his speech, he said one thing he's asked a lot is, what would you recommend to be as successful as you are? What is it that, what advice would you give to young people to achieve your levels of success? He said simply, they need to remember that life is hard. Life's hard. Nothing is given to you. Tom Brady, for instance, didn't come out of college as the quarterback everybody wanted. Sat on the bench for a year behind a guy that everybody thought was the greatest quarterback ever. Had to earn it. Had to work at it. Because it's hard. Christians, we need to understand, we need to believe, we need to embrace the idea that discipleship is hard. We do a disservice to new Christians. We do a disservice to old Christians when we say that Christianity is easy. When we leave people the impression that all you got to do is repent, confess, be baptized, and everything's going to be great for the rest of you, that is not what Jesus even teaches. The life of being a follower of Jesus is tough. That's why He says to be together. That's why we're instructed to not forsake these times of being together, because we need each other. Because being a disciple is hard. Being a disciple requires something of us. And that's not even fair to say, because really being a true disciple of Jesus requires everything of us. Deny self, take up your cross, and follow Jesus. That's hard. But because Jesus says we can do it, we know we can do it. He's promised us we can do it. He says, I'll give you the tools to do it. I'll help you do it. But don't ever think it's going to be easy. Engage with the people around you. Lock arms when you have to. Lean on each other when you have to. And Jesus says we can all be better disciples together. The cost for our discipleship was paid completely by Jesus. The cost of our discipleship is you and I being fully and completely and totally committed to Him. He did everything He had to do. He did everything to set us up to be good followers. We just have to take action. We just have to be a part of it. We sing a song, a hymn that I think I've sung my whole life. Jesus paid it all. It's a beautiful old song. What's the next line? Jesus paid it all. Period. So all to Him I owe. That's what it means to be a follower. That's what it means to be a disciple. So this morning I want to encourage you. As a Christian, if you've tried to follow at a distance, if you tried to kind of keep some space between you and Jesus and this whole fully committed thing, give that up this morning. We sang a few minutes ago, we sang here in this place, lay your burdens down right here. This is your time to decide I'm going to commit fully and I'm going to be a follower. Maybe you're not a Christian this morning. Maybe you don't know what any of this is even about. But you know you want to follow Jesus. Maybe you don't know how. Maybe there are distractions. Maybe there are voices saying, don't do that, don't do this, you don't need to do that. Maybe there are voices saying, come do this instead. Come to Jesus. That's the answer. Come follow me. Jesus says, come and follow me and I'll take your burdens. Put them on me. So the invitation this morning is yours. From us, yes, but it's from Jesus. If there's anything you need, whether it's to strengthen your walk as a follower or to begin your walk as a follower, whatever it is, let us know. Why together we stand.